Their bond wasn't just built on laughs, it was forged in fire. As the pressure mounted and the spotlight grew hotter, the Smothers brothers leaned into each other like never before. They filmed 72 groundbreaking episodes, each one under the suffocating scrutiny of CBS censors. Every second reviewed. Every syllable dissected. But on September 17, 1967, something slipped through the cracks. During The Who's electrifying performance, a brief camera shot captured something in the background, something so small, it went unnoticed by censors, the director, even the brothers themselves. But what it revealed changed everything. It confirmed a suspicion that had long lingered in the shadows. This wasn't just a comedy show, it was a revolution in disguise. And like every revolution, it started with heartbreak. The story of the Smothers brothers didn't begin in fame or fortune, it began in tragedy. Their story didn't begin on a stage, it began in the ashes of war. Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., their father, was a decorated U.S. Army officer stationed in the Philippines during World War II. In 1941, when Japan invaded, his wife Ruth and their 2 young sons were evacuated. He wasn't so lucky. Captured by enemy forces, Major Smothers endured the brutal Bataan Death March, a harrowing, inhumane ordeal. But he survived, only to be sent to Fukuoka Camp No. 22 in Japan, one of the harshest prison camps of the war. By April 1945, as the world edged closer to peace, he was too weak to work. They transferred him to Korea, but he never arrived. Some say he was buried at sea, others claim he was cremated. Of the 110 men transferred with him, only 36 survived. He was the last to die. Back home, Ruth was left to raise 2 boys, Tom, born in 1937, and Dick in 1938, alone. Their childhood in California was marked by long hours, loneliness, and the quiet ache of a father lost to war. That ache never left them. Instead, it shaped them. Fueled them. And eventually, it gave birth to a kind of comedy the world hadn't seen before, one laced with truth, wit, and just enough sorrow to make it unforgettable. Their first real break came in 1959 at the Purple Onion, a small club in San Francisco. Booked for just 2 weeks, their unique chemistry and disarming humor turned them into a sensation. They stayed for 36 weeks. The world was finally listening, and they had a lot to say. Audiences couldn't get enough of them, a quirky blend of folk music, sharp wit, and brotherly banter that felt both fresh and familiar. One fateful night, when a flamenco dancer was injured last minute, Tom and Dick filled in. What was meant to be a quick substitution turned into a revelation. Their impromptu performance left the crowd roaring, and proved they weren't just entertainers, they were lightning in a bottle. By the end of their run at the Purple Onion, they were pulling in $2,000 a week, a staggering leap from the $2 a night gigs they had once clung to. Their breakout album, The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, dropped in 1961 and changed everything. But the roots of their magic ran deeper. It all started in college, when Tom formed a group called the Casual Quintet. He played guitar. Dick, determined to join, taught himself bass from scratch. One by one, the other members dropped out, but the brothers stuck together. To fill time between songs, they began joking around, playful digs, sibling sarcasm, bursts of absurdity. And the audience loved it. They didn't just laugh, they connected. What started as filler became the formula. Tom played the wide-eyed innocent, Dick, the no-nonsense straight man. It was real, it was raw, and it was the beginning of a comedy revolution born from brotherhood. The audience would roar when Tom said, "Mom always liked you best." It wasn't fake, it was just who they were. People could relate to their comedy. By the mid-1960s, they had a chance to become even bigger. At the time, CBS was losing big to NBC's Bonanza on Sunday nights. Bonanza was getting a quarter of all TV viewers in the U.S. It had already smashed 2 other CBS hits, Harry Mason and The Gary Moore Show. CBS decided they had to try something new. They wanted to attract a younger audience and hoped the Smothers. CBS hoped that Tom and Dick's sharp, funny, and unique humor would help the network look cool again. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour started on February 5, 1967. At first glance, it seemed like a normal variety show. Ed Sullivan introduced them as typical American kids, but after a few episodes, it was clear that they weren't typical at all. They made jokes about the Vietnam War, made fun of politicians, and talked about real issues. Every week, they pushed the limits, and people loved it. Younger viewers tuned in, and advertisers were thrilled. Before the show started, Tom had asked for full creative control, which CBS agreed to because they were desperate for a hit. This deal gave the brothers the freedom to say whatever they wanted. They invited folk singers like Pete Seeger to sing anti-war songs, and they made fun of President Johnson on national TV. Every show felt like a surprise, and every show felt like a risk. CBS censors fought them at every turn, but the brothers often fought back, making the writing staff was just as brave as the hosts. Young comedy writers like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg got their start there. They wrote jokes that mattered and broke the usual TV rules. Many of them went on to change American comedy forever with their work, which shaped shows like Saturday Night Live, All in the Family, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. In 1968, something unexpected happened on American TV. On October 6, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour showed the Beatles' promotional video. A promotional film for Hey Jude had been shown in the UK a few weeks earlier, on September 8. This was the first time Americans could see that type of film. Back then, they weren't called music videos, they were called promotional films. The Beatles filmed Hey Jude at Twickenham Studios on September 4. Paul McCartney even designed the set himself. A big orchestra dressed in white tuxedos played along, and 300 extras sang the ending together. Ringo Starr had just returned to the band after taking a break. Not only was this a big moment for them, but the next week the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour showed Revolution. Two Beatles videos back-to-back gave American audiences a new way to experience the band. Other shows, not even the Ed Sullivan Show, couldn't do this, but the Smothers Brothers could. It felt like a big shift, music was changing, and TV was changing too. In 1967, another big moment happened on the same show. Pete. For years, Seeger had been banned from TV, but he was asked to sing. He had been off the radio for almost 17 years because of a blacklist. When he finally sang, CBS cut the song before it aired in September 1967 because it was critical of President Johnson's Vietnam policy. But Tom Smothers wouldn't be quiet, so he made sure the story got out. Public outrage forced CBS to let Seeger come back, and on February 25, 1968, millions of people finally saw him sing the song uncensored. It was the first time a blacklisted artist had so clearly criticized a president. It was a powerful moment showing. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour also put on shows for bands that no one else would touch. From 1967 to 1969, The Who, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield, and Stephen Wolfe all played. These weren't safe choices for mainstream TV. At the end of one show, The Who destroyed their instruments and set off explosives in Keith Moon's drum kit. The noise hurt Pete Townshend's hearing and sent shrapnel flying. The Doors played Touch Me with a full orchestra Jefferson Airplane. There was a song about the fear of nuclear war by Airplane, For What It's Worth, by Buffalo Springfield, and Born to Be Wild, by Stephen Wolfe brought raw energy into American homes. The Smothers Brothers didn't care if it scared the network, they just wanted to give these rebellious voices a place to speak. Some of rock's biggest names liked that spirit. On April 26, 1969, at the Los Angeles Forum, Jimi Hendrix stopped playing and dedicated his show to the Smothers Brothers. He called them heroes for letting art and protest happen. Hendrix was at the top of his game. His show had just been cancelled by CBS for being too controversial, but Hendrix didn't forget. On that stage, he told everyone that the Smothers Brothers were important. Music and comedy had never worked so well together, and they did it with humor too. A great example was a recurring bit called Share a Little Tea with Goldie. Lee French played Goldie O'Keefe, a spaced-out hippie who gave funny advice that had double meanings. Goldie's name was. They changed the name from Goldie Keefe, which was a slang word for marijuana, but most people watching at home knew what was going on. When Goldie talked about roaches, no one thought she meant bugs. Younger viewers loved the joke because it felt like the show was winking at them. Even though the network was watching, Goldie became a cult favorite. Keith Moon was never one to hold back. On September 17, 1967, when The Who went on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, he decided to go even further than usual. The band was there to play My Generation, but Moon had something else planned. He had secretly stuffed his kick drum with explosives. No one had agreed to this, not even Moon's bandmates. Moon wanted the perfect ending, loud, unforgettable, and crazy. When the last note of the song hit, the explosives went off with a loud bang. Smoke and debris flew across the stage, and Moon was knocked backward by a piece of a cymbal. Pete Townshend's hair was blown up in a big mess. The force was so strong that, while Moon had planned chaos and spectacle, the noise was so loud that it shocked the crowd into silence before they started to scream and cheer. But the price was high. Townshend would lose almost 90% of his hearing in one ear. The ringing that followed was painful and never really stopped. Years later, Townshend still talked about the constant pain and how playing guitar became harder because of the damage. It was an unforgettable moment for everyone. Then there was the guitar. In the midst of the chaos and smoke, Townshend grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it on stage. Smothers was too shocked to say anything, but it felt like the perfect ending to the chaos. It was a loud, rebellious moment that showed exactly who the Who were. They were pushing limits that no one had dared to touch before. That explosion and the smashed guitar did more than make headlines, they became a part of rock history. Parents hated it, but kids thought it was freedom. It was a real split between generations, and it was exactly what the Smothers Brothers and their rebellious crowd wanted. The performance will never be forgotten. Joan Baez was also stirring things up. She was a folk singer who fought for peace and social justice, and everyone knew it. Born on January 9, 1941, in Staten Island, New York, she had spent her whole life standing up for what she believed in. By 1967, Baez had already been arrested for protesting, and her songs spoke to people who wanted change. When she went on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, she wanted to dedicate a song to her husband David Harris, who was going to jail for 3 years. Harris had refused to serve in the military and spoke out against the Vietnam War. Baez was proud of him and told the audience so on the show, but CBS cut out most of what she said, leaving only a vague message before she sang. This was one of many signs that CBS was under a lot of pressure. Network didn't want to make the government or donors mad. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson complained about the show. He called CBS at 3 a.m. and asked them to take control of the Smothers Brothers. Nixon then worked even harder to get them taken off the air. In 1968, the show booked Harry Belafonte and put together a powerful performance. Belafonte sang "Lord Don't Stop the Carnival," while footage showed police beating anti-war protesters at the Democratic National Convention. It was a brave and real protest against political violence in Chicago, but CBS pulled the whole segment before it aired. That wasn't the end of it, though. They then sold the 5 minutes they had cut to the Republican Party or campaign ads for the politicians they were protesting. It was clear which side the network was on by late 1968, when the Smothers Brothers were under a lot of pressure. CBS had decided that every script, joke, song lyric, and even full videotapes had to be sent in for review. It wasn't just a quick check, censors would look over every single word, looking for anything political, religious, or even harmless jokes. Everything had to meet their strict standards. Guest stars with a darker sense of humor were often censored as well, and some were cut altogether. The deadline was set 10 days before each show. At the time, That was a strict requirement meant to stop the brothers' habit of pushing the limits. The writers felt stuck in an endless cycle. After rewriting, resubmitting, and waiting, CBS often asked for changes hours before the show aired. The writers would joke that it felt like death by 1,000 cuts, and they weren't wrong. One day, Tom and Dick decided to fight back. They made a sketch in which Tom played a censor who tore up scripts with big scissors and stopped performers in the middle of a sentence. The joke was clear, their show was being shut down. The punchline was bold, all that was left on screen was silence. But CBS didn't get the joke. Internal emails showed that CBS thought the sketch was too bad for their image. Elaine May was in a similar sketch that was also pulled. In her final line, she said, "If we can't say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." To make matters worse, making fun of censorship was now illegal. But the brothers weren't giving up. They decided to play a game with CBS over deadlines. They would deliver tapes as late as possible, sometimes sending a safe version for review and then making last-minute changes before going on air. This drove CBS crazy, and they accused them of breaking their contract. In April 1969, CBS finally had enough. They said the Smothers brothers had failed to submit a tape on time, even though evidence showed CBS was partly to blame. The show, which was still one of the 10 most watched in the US, was cancelled because of delays. The real fight wasn't about deadlines, it was about control. Tom Smothers would later say that it was all part of a plan to silence them. The fight spread to the press. The New York Times wrote an opinion piece in which they said CBS was holding the Smothers brothers hostage by their own creativity. Letters and protests were sent to CBS from all over the world. Politicians and artists spoke out. Suddenly, this wasn't about deadlines anymore. Just one show, the editorial scared CBS executives, who rushed into meetings to try to fix the damage. The Smothers brothers stood their ground, determined to tell the truth. Tom said, "They're not just shutting down our show, they're trying to shut down the truth." That stand became a turning point in television history. But CBS had other problems as well. Big sponsors like Ford and Procter & Gamble started pulling their ads because the show was anti-war and political jokes. Within months, CBS had lost millions of dollars. Internal memos showed that sponsor pressure was a big part of why the shows were cancelled. Even a top-rated show could be cancelled if advertisers were scared away. Tom later said, "We won the lawsuit, but we lost the culture war." People who bought ads told Dick, "Speak too freely and you'll pay the price." In March 1969, he did a Nixon impression and said, "I will end the Vietnam War as soon as I can figure out where the off button is." It was short, sharp, and true, but it made CBS angry and scared sponsors. The new president and the Vietnam War both touched a nerve. The network was already nervous, and this pushed them to the limit. On April 4, 1969, CBS canceled the show. They said they did this right away. They didn't turn in the tapes on time, but everyone knew it was really about their political views. The show was set to come back for a second season. Brothers was renewed just a few weeks before CBS pulled an already taped episode with comic David Steinberg giving another anti-war speech. That episode was never shown in America, it was shown in Canada instead. The cancellation was very harsh and sudden. It let all the other performers know that going too far off track would have bad results. The Smothers brothers fought back in. They went to court and sued CBS for breach of contract. After 4 years of fighting, they won in April 1973. The judge gave them $776,300, which is about $5.5 million today. The ruling was historic. It made it clear that networks couldn't use censorship as an excuse to cancel shows. But the win was bittersweet, they had already lost their platform. Other projects they worked on never quite lived up to the magic of their comedy hour, and a tamer show they did on NBC didn't catch on at CBS. CBS quickly found a replacement on June 15, 1969. Hi-Ha, a clean rural comedy show with country songs and corny jokes, debuted. It was exactly what CBS wanted. It ran for 23 seasons and proved that networks would always choose safe entertainment over risk. The fight left its mark on both Tom and Dick. Tomac was hit the hardest. He said years later that losing the show left him empty. It broke his confidence and took a long time to heal. Dick turned to other hobbies, like car racing and winemaking, to pass the time. The Smothers brothers tried again a year after being fired by CBS in 1969. This time they took their comedy to ABC. It was summer 1970, and the mood had changed. ABC was wary because they didn't want any trouble like CBS had. They kept a close eye on the brothers and told them to tone it down. People weren't as interested in rebellious humor anymore, the Vietnam War was ending, and people had moved on. The show didn't last, ratings dropped, and ABC was forced to shut it down. These few episodes showed how quickly public taste can change. One year they were on top, and the next they were behind. In January 1975, they tried again, this time on NBC. The first episode was a huge hit. It was the fifth most watched show in America with a 50 share, but their success didn't last. There was tension behind the scenes. Producer Joe Hamilton fought with Tom and Dick. Tom wasn't even allowed to do retakes without losing some of his pay. They weren't allowed to meet with writers or talk to the press freely. The show's ratings quickly dropped, and Hamilton quit in anger. NBC finally gave Tom control of the last 4 episodes, which included some of their most daring work, like a joke about cocaine, which was unusual for prime time at the time, and big guests like Ringo Starr and George Carlin. However, NBC canceled the show halfway through the season, showing that networks could ruin even a promising comeback. Something unexpected happened. Almost 20 years after firing the Smothers brothers, CBS invited them back for a 1-hour reunion special. They even called it the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the 20th reunion. The special was nominated for 3 Primetime Emmys, and writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein also came back. It was a nostalgic, gentle show that did well in the ratings but felt very safe. The old political energy turned into long-gone audiences and critics appreciated seeing them once more, but it changed into now not innovative anymore. That equal year CBS introduced them returned for a complete revival of their display. The timing turned into strange. The Author Guild changed into on strike without writers. The brothers depended on their old routines. Guests did maximum of the comedy whilst the strike ended. That they had new scripts once more. Rankings went up a chunk. The show even earned 5 Emmy nominations. However, TV had moved at the revival lasted 2 seasons from March 1988 to August 1989. It in no way had the effect the authentic did. The brothers' tale become preserved for all time inside the fall of 2022 UC Santa Barbara's Acting Arts Collection accepted their entire archive. It included contracts, felony papers, pics, track sheets and recordings. David Suber, the curator, said it deserved an area along the Library of Congress. This collection suggests their fight without cost speech and there have an effect on comedy. Even many years later their work is still studied. It proves comedy can undertaking power and speak up for real. Alternate that was the Smothers brothers' real legacy before Saturday Night Time Live even existed. They had been already pushing obstacles. Their show ran from 1967 to 1969. It made jokes approximately battle censorship and politicians. Writers like Lorne Michaels, who could create SNL, found out from them later. Comedians like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver and Samantha Bee followed that route. The Smothers brothers confirmed comedy may want to talk reality to energy and make people suppose. The show became additionally a launchpad for comedy giants. Steve Martin turned into one of the first writers. Rob Reiner and George Carlin were regulars. 2 lots of them said later they owed their begin to this show. The brothers had created a safe area to take dangers. That gave American humor a sharp new facet that lasted for decades. Whilst CBS can led them in 1969, they fought lower back. Even though their show was one of the maximum rated, CBS pulled the plug because of censorship. The brothers took them to court. Docket they received it was a landmark case for free speech on television. For the primary time a comedy display had correctly fought back in opposition to a community. It set a precedent that innovative freedom topics and that they did all this at a second while the US was cut up over Vietnam civil rights and subculture itself. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour become a bridge. They invited guests like the Who, Jefferson Aircraft and Simon and Garfunkel, even People singer Pete Seeger, who have been banned for his anti-struggle music, and that they showed new motion pictures just like the Beatles' Good Day Jude. For many people this became their first publicity to the counterculture. Invoice Mar as soon as summed it up flawlessly. The brothers were not afraid to upset people who disagreed with them. They were not trying to please every person. They showed that comedy should take a stand and that it can matter even after the show changed into cancelled. That lesson stayed, and it nevertheless subjects these days.